early on, 24 people. We haven't even started our conversation. Thank you,
I know that's good.
everybody who's joining us. We've got I'm kind of trying to
Cheers,
relax
everybody.
because we've got a 3.5 hour session ahead of us. So Sean, I divided the first hour is all you while I listen. And how are things? You were on the road.
Very good, mate. Actually, we haven't done one of these for a couple of weeks, but yeah, those that don't know, I went to did some talks in Canada. Went to see my family in Toronto. I haven't seen them for quite a while, and got invited to go to Toronto University to talk about Ukraine, which was really interesting. I didn't really know what to expect when I got there. Really, speaking to the Ukrainian diaspora about what it's like to be Ukrainian living in such a large community. Canada's got one of the biggest in the world. It had some 100,000 in
Mhm.
just Edmonton, so it was quite interesting. We had academics turn up, and we had second and third generation Ukrainians turn up. Generally, some people are on X and people on here that came to see me in Canada. Um,
Good.
and it was quite an interesting talk. I learned a great deal. More so when I went to Edmonton, which was even more sort of Ukrainian. Even I
Hmm.
would say more Ukrainian than in some parts of Ukraine, because it's not had that Soviet era
Whitewashing.
shadow thrown
Yeah.
over it and repression, and then the
Right.
Russian shadow that's followed. So generally, a lot of places are actually, you know, yellow and blue is prominent everywhere. I went to see the biggest Easter egg in the world, Ukrainian Easter egg in the world, which was quite interesting, because all around there is like full of Ukrainian nostalgia. The villages are still speaking the language. Shumka, the dancing, and it's quite a thing over there. I'm told it's
Right.
very competitive. It's beautiful as well, and traditional Ukrainian folk dancing. So, it's caught on over there. So, I didn't really think that the country, the diaspora, had to really worry about keeping hold of the Ukrainian culture. They are it. I mean, it's an extension of Ukraine. It's um, very much they're alive and kicking, and they're supporting not just sitting there sympathetically supporting, they're actively supporting, which is why I was there to raise money for the armed forces of Ukraine to help their struggles here. So it's very active. Made some lots of new friends, which is and Edmonton's a cracking place to go. My Edmonton's Oilers cap. I was an honorary supporter through the playoffs this week, so I've been watching that steadily to see if they get through. And then it took me about 3 days
Yeah,
to get
man.
home. Sounds like
Oh
it's not
man,
a quick
that's
one. 4 time zones, literally a 4 hour
the
flight from
coming and
Edmonton to
going is the
Toronto.
hardest part.
Another 9 hours from Toronto to Warsaw,
Jesus.
another 4 hour journey to the border, and another 17-hour journey
Ugh.
across Ukraine back home. By the time I was like that, when I got in Wednesday, and I was thinking, I'm going to meet myself going out any minute. So it was
I'm that
pretty
guy now
long.
where it's like, Chris, you want to meet? Sure, of course. Where? Oh, like a right bank. Oh man, that's kind of a far distance. Okay.
Right
Um,
bank's really far,
I'll be over there
Yeah.
in 2 days. You still gonna be there? No, it's not that bad anyway. But no, I really feel for my friends who do a lot of the traveling side. That and I've done it enough to know what it's like to have 18 hours of trying to prop your head up at all the wrong. Airports are not designed schedule wise to even care about your neck.
And that's
You
not
know.
included the layovers. You get 3 or 4
Yeah,
hours
exactly.
out there, an overnighter in Warsaw. I mean, it's like 3 days to get to Edmonton, which is probably the furthest I would like to go. It's
Yeah, I
but
mean,
well
having
worth the
someone
trip, really.
romanticize the travel is no one I've ever known.
No,
Um,
I mean, I talked to the woman next to me, and they're really fascinated. It's like we were chatting all the way back,
oh,
which is
yeah,
great.
the destination events, yes, but the travel part,
Yeah.
the in between at the
No, the
airports
travel's
and
it's the
Warsaw
jet lag.
Airport.
The
Oh
jet
God,
lag's,
yeah,
you know, at 3 in the morning, you're just like awake and wide awake, and you can't sleep. And then it's like when you go in, it's like you know, over 24 hours of daylight. By the
right.
end of it, you're like, oh,
When
I
you're
need to sleep.
abroad, when you're abroad, you have no air raids.
Oh, did you see the sirens they put out? The fire engines. I was on the fire engine route in the city. So it was
Yeah.
like every like hour. And I was thinking, well, it's a different kind of siren. At least I'm not going to
I
get
guess that's
rockets
true.
around.
If you live in some places, you substitute one sound that I rarely hear that. I rarely hear,
My
an
PTSD, I
ambulance
was
or
lying in bed going,
right.
I was like,
I
PTSD
just
was
hear
kicking
air
in.
raid sirens in the middle of the day. What is it? I don't know. It's a fucking jet in the air. Where's my coffee? Oh, thanks. Okay. You have two sugars? Okay, thanks. All right, thanks.
Well, I did get back, and
Yeah, it's a rocket.
you saw what happened when I got back. I got to the train station, literally just got off the train station, and the drones came in. You saw the surface-to-air missile.
Yeah.
I didn't see the guy firing it, but yeah, but they took out the drones above the railway station. I was thinking, well, I need to welcome
I was
home.
just there.
I was
Remember?
like, holy cow, you know, I just
Yeah.
got home and it's
I think I
already
sent you
boom.
a video message of me being in front of the Vogzalna there because we were waiting for our trip and
Oh, that's right, yeah.
had air raid go off, and I'm like, well, I'm not exactly in the place where I would say nothing's going to happen
I gotta
because
be honest,
it's the train
the
train
trains
station
aren't the
just being
same
started.
anymore because
Yeah,
you can get pulled off the train, so you're keeping all your valuables nearby. If a guy says you've got to get off the train, you've got to get off the train pretty quick because the drones are around by the train. So the Russians are now attacking the trains, which is
yeah, exactly.
deeply disturbing that
No,
they're
they've
doing that.
attacked two trains within 7 days proximity of me being on trains in the same place.
Yeah, me
So
too. And it's not the
Kharkiv,
same. You don't
Sumy,
sleep
and
now.
yeah.
You're just conscious of that you
What
could
is
be dragged
sleep?
off the train.
What is this sleep you speak of? Is this when I'm like in between articles and I wake up and realize I want to finish an article, so I
Do you know,
better
as I've
get
got
up?
older, I've
I'm
just
so
started to
tired.
realize I just sleep when I sleep now. When I'm awake, I'm awake. It's just like
Pretty much, yeah.
stop trying to fight it now.
I have to really try harder to figure out what day of the week I'm on because it's still Monday.
Yeah, time's going so quick though. I mean, it's like it's
It's May.
phenomenal.
It's May, bro,
So
bruh.
where are we going to
It's
start today then, boss? Now
May
we got
2026.
40 people in nearly. I think that's great. It's
Well,
great
good.
for
We're
we've only
almost
just
done with our
started.
first hour, so thank you for everyone. I hope you enjoyed the first hour, and we covered a lot of terrain there. Let me ask you this. We're looking at the calendar, and I remember of some of the fond events that I will have that are kind of odd for someone of my non-pedigree is sitting in front of David Petraeus at the Kyiv Security Forum with Rob Bauer of NATO and others here a year ago on May 8th, and essentially Victory Day, here. And I'm like, oh, the former head of the CIA is in Kiev while Russia is not. Victory, like little victories. So in a few days, I keep hearing that Putin wants to have a pause for Victory Day, and you know, I don't know what he's got left to roll down the street for one, so I'm not sure.
Not very much by the sounds of
What
it.
I mean, what do you think about that? Um, Victory Day, How do you have
Wow.
Victory Day in the middle of this quagmire of shit that he can't seem to figure out how to land?
Oh, sorry about that. It just pops
Oh,
into
what
the
is
show.
that? What is
That's
this?
my
What is
bushy
this?
friend here. Look, this guy go.
Michelti.
I'm thinking about Big Tad. So listen, if I let me start with telling you where I was
Take
on
it.
Victory Day 4 years ago. I was in a
Yeah.
black site basement, which is I'm writing an article about. It. It's going to come out tomorrow. But I was in a. Oh look, you can see him. Look, there you go. That's probably better for people to see him. So I was in a black site basement, somewhere in Donetsk, like in
Fuck me,
2022.
man.
Not exactly the best place to celebrate a victory parade. Anyway,
Hmm.
Vlad pretty much tells me that sometimes historically, Ukraine and Russia used to swap people on victory days as like a peaceful gesture.
Mm,
And I used to say, I think it's a little bit too soon. I was only captured, halfway through April.
mm.
But we've sort of got our hopes up that maybe Easter, maybe Victory Day parade, we might actually get
Yeah,
exchanged. And
I remember that first year victory
um,
parade.
I wasn't surprised we didn't, but my victory days now. I'm pretty sure that Vlad Putin has pretty much taken any meaning out of that day. It has gone. It's a theatre show that's now even that struggling. And
Mm,
what I say is that you've got a country committing the most heinous war crimes, running Nazi-style filtration camps in the east of
that's right.
Ukraine, committing, like I said, heinous war crimes, torture. I was electrocuted, beaten around the time of this Victory Day. I mean, it has significance for me, but it's nothing
Right.
to do with the liberation and the successful defeat of the Nazis because they've just now invaded Ukraine. So it's like
Yeah.
for me, it's like this is pot calling the kettle black in a way, and it is coarse, but you know those darker chapters of World War II and the Nazis, Russia's just adopted here. So it's very hard for a country for someone to say they hate Nazis and they're going to denazify Ukraine. What are you going to do? Denazify Ukraine with more of them? I mean, you've got Rusich Group, Wagner, you've got all these groups that are connected to hard right and far right and Nazi groups that don't even get
Right.
mentioned in the press. Yet, I saw this week with a journalist in Canada write about the Nazis of Azov. And this is
Ah,
like 4.5 years later. So I
that
called it
guy.
out. I called it out literally for what it was. He had pictures from pre 2014. It was, I called it for the lazy journalism it was. It got picked up by local press in Canada. It got picked up by
Mhm.
people here. And they swarmed him. He said he was being victimized then. And I was like, well, that is very Russian, isn't it? You make the
Yeah, yeah.
statement,
I
you
was
do
just
the
gonna say the
stuff,
same thing.
and
It's like,
suddenly I'm being picked on and I'm victimized. Yeah, it's like, yeah, you just called me a Nazi pal, and that's not true. So, Victory Day for me is very much
mm,
what it must be felt like for the oppressed and the Jews during World War II. And this is a country that's, celebrating victory over Nazi Germany. I mean, it is that now, essentially, for us. It is that for essentially me. They're ethnically cleansing in East Ukraine, set up Nazi-style
right,
filtration camps. They now got a terror campaign on Ukraine where, because they're not having the battlefield successes, they're now escalating the terror campaign here by hitting
right.
this week, I think it was yesterday, a bus in Dnipro that was parked up at a bus
Exactly.
stop. This is the center of Dnipro, 2 hours from the front line, and a drone has come in and hit a bus in like what is a city the size of probably Birmingham, with people, 1 million people, quite a big city. That's come in essentially just to hit a bus. I mean, that is just terrorism in any other name. And then this week, I'm going to sort of summarize what we're talking about. But you had this week then Trump's still pushing the Russian agenda, even more so, more overtly.
Another phone call. Exactly.
So you're just sitting here. This is really bad. This is like I wrote a piece this week about saying that this is America who was on our side of World War II, and now you're not sure of where that sits now, especially after this week and Vance's comments the week before, and Victory Day parade. And of course, Trump wants Victory Day. Of course, he believes Putin. It's a massive propaganda stunt. I mean, it is there to, as I said, Victory Day is about, if you're an 80s kid like me, Victory Day is about projection. As an 80s kid, you remember those Red Square, and they are impressive. When I was a kid,
Mm,
I was in awe thinking, look at all those soldiers, look at those missiles, look at all that, not really understanding what it was about as a kid.
sure.
But he's not even going to have any there this year, which tells you that even the theatre of it's gone. I mean, this is how bad
Right,
it's
right,
gone
right.
for Russia and Ukraine. That's a positive. Yeah, it's going to have a victory day, but there's going to be no equipment because one
And
is scared
and I
about it.
didn't realize as a young person, I was born in '69. I didn't recognize the facade of it until many, many years later when, on some level it would be pointed out and it would, digest that. And then as time went on, where a whole range of projections from the Russian Federation, eventually, especially Russian Federation, not the USSR, um, had defined how I saw this whole region, and now that I've lived here for 4 years, I have a completely different view than I would have had without living here, obviously.
Me too. Yeah,
But
yeah. I live in Dnipro. It's like the R and
I
D center for the
I have
Soviet
to
Union.
I
I
have
had
to
no
work
idea.
hard to find that old view when I think about how did we get here? Oh, that's right. We used to believe X Y Z about this region, and now we know better. But the mythology of World War II was where I was going to head with that. Even now, Americans who don't live in the context you and I live in here tell me that they are really just beginning to dawn on them that when Russia says we lost all these people, that the best of them came from Ukraine,
Yeah,
and that how offensive it is. This was a Republican a couple days ago saying how offensive it is that we're not doing more. Americans are not doing more to help Ukraine, considering a range of ways in which Ukraine more identifies with the American dream than Russia could ever appeal
yeah,
to.
absolutely. Yeah, it's
Like
a country
Ukraine's
that's
doing what you guys believe in doing.
it's a
We
country
hate
that's very
you.
conservative in its values. It's very
It
religious, and
is, yeah.
why America, why Trump's turned on it the way he has, don't know. But that's a minority. I mean, I know America's there's tons of support in Canada and America for Ukraine, and I think that you're seeing this escalating the volumes. Let me start again. I'm jumping ahead of myself, getting excited. Trump's turned up the volume. This is something we've seen for since before his inauguration.
Hmm.
The Trump administration, by its appointments and its actions, it was always going to go down this route. Even when, as I say to you, that as we joke about the people that came in and went, sure, Trump could be really good for Ukraine. And it's like, no,
Hmm.
I don't know what planet you're on, son, but it's like I can't see that. And now we're at the point where the volume's been turned up, and he's openly and Vance is openly, and they're openly pushing this anti-Ukraine, pro-Russian agenda
Hmm.
with political framing that's now whitewashing,
Hmm.
war crimes. And simplifying it, which is even more sick, which we talked about, I think, last time when I was on about they're only haggling over, some small amount of square kilometers. No, this is one of the biggest countries in the world, longest front lines in the world.
Exactly.
This is my home. 6 million people internally displaced. No, this is not about a small, square kilometerage of Ukraine. This is people's homes, livelihoods. You can't just sell out the people and give them Donbass because they're already conscripting. Russia's already conscripting. Ukraine is forcibly conscripting fighting age males in the occupied territories to fight for Russia.
That's right.
ICC wanted war criminal, indoctrination of kids. I mean, the list goes on, and Trump's administration are putting pressure on Ukraine to just give up. And even this
Repeatedly,
week said
correct.
they're defeated. I mean, 2 hours from the front line, we're defeated. What am I doing? Why am I still
Right.
here? Why have
Right.
I not left?
Oh, I know, Sean. Man, I've been wiped off the map so many times in the last 4 years. I walk outside after reading the internet, and I look around, and we're still here. We're pissed off and we've been bombed, but we're still here. Um, I wrote a piece the other day. Trump fears the comedians more than the mob boss. A
Yeah.
comedian makes a widow's joke. A war criminal gets a phone call. Only one of them has anything to worry about. Um, and
I know.
I'm gonna
Let me just.
apologize to
I
my
got,
paid subscribers more than even the free subscribers. I'm gonna apologize to say I don't have to work hard at riffing what's wrong with Donald Trump when it's like this because it was right after the Jimmy Kimmel is going to be investigated by FCC, and then there was the phone call announcement. Oh fuck! I got up and I went to get my coffee and I sat down and basically just went, Who the fuck do you keep obsessing with? You know, you obsess with comedians and late night hosts, but this guy who's mowed through an entire country, you want to see him at the G7, and you want to make sure that Vlad feels okay. And but
It's
yeah,
the
oh
it's the we've given 350 billion to Ukraine, and if you don't believe me, Ukraine is defeated. If you don't believe me, it's all fake news. I'm like that.
well, also they've already been defeated. I heard that happened in the last 48 hours. Um, Ukraine has already lost. It's like Vance was just asked this question pretty point blank. You know, you said that this was true 2 years ago. What do you say now? And he blew it off because he knew that he had acted against it. He literally sat on social media for an hour on X with the live spaces with Elon Musk and everyone, just focus on derailing aid for Ukraine. And I've always found it weird when someone has that pet project that's out of nowhere. Like, why that and why there? Of all the things you could be obsessed with, why that and why there? You
Soundbite
know,
for state TV, exactly bang on. That's what it's
exactly.
doing. This is a
Soundbite for state
collaboration now.
TV. Yeah, exactly.
It's a collaboration now. That's the point we're trying to get through on the journalism, through
Thank
doing
you
the
to our
interviews.
wonderful viewers and readers. Yeah.
Absolutely, that is exactly what we're talking about. This is not. This is a collaboration now between the Trump administration and Russia.
Uh,
And this is the bit we've been trying to point out that people are starting to get an idea that it is now. For what I'm
yeah.
not care whether it's compromat. I don't care whether it's he's got affiliations and he just likes Putin. I don't care. We're in this position, and that's the situation. You know, I'll let if it's Epstein, I'll let the Americans take care of that. They'll hang
Right.
him and flip him, tear him
Right.
apart, and I'm quite happy about it. But we're here, and this is something we've been screaming about for how long? Chris, 2 years? We've been
10.
saying the same thing.
He
It
was
feels
running
like.
for office in 2016. I'm like,
Oh
no,
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 that
no,
was
no,
only
no,
in
no, no, no,
Ukraine
no.
8 years ago, so that can't be 10 years. Don't do that to me. But it
Don't
is
vote for
something
him.
we've been
Anyway.
going on about it for years and years. And
No,
fine.
I've been at the whole Russian hacker thing for a decade. This, like, right about now, a decade ago, was the first time I had to put my work down about ISIS tracking and suddenly pivot to. The funny part, since we have viewers here to share this with, is I actually went like my old job. Yeah, why would I want to look at server hacking reports? Like I'm learning Arabic and cool shit. You know, like you know, it was such a weird mind that I had at that moment of what I was doing versus what I really needed to do on the other side. I went to
Mm.
something I already knew how to do, which is server security, white sheet reading, if you will. And it was important. You know, the Russians had hacked the Democratic Party, and they had hacked the Democratic Party to steal materials to get the other guy elected, and that fucking matters. And that was a decade ago.
It does matter. It really does
So
matter because and I don't believe it's all Trump. There's with Vance and the team, we've always said that he's just you know they're using him as a conduit, a puppet for the presidency. He's going to be the fall guy at
eh,
the end of it. But
even a lot of his
um, you
supporters
know,
have. His supporters over the years, when they come into spaces, we would say, "So what? Why did you, why did you support him, or do you support him?" Oh well, and they kind of dance around, no real answer. But then I'd say, "So is he? He's like a human Molotov cocktail on the system." Yeah, like that was the only place I could get agreement when they were abstract about everything else. He basically is a big fuck you to the system for people who don't know how the system works. They don't think it works
yeah.
for them. So just
His
it's
team haven't even
funny.
been in. His peace team had not even been to Kiev. I mean, it's just ludicrous today when they said, "Well, we're not coming to Kiev. We're going
Eight
to solve it.
times they've been to Moscow and not
Gonna,
once to
I could
Kiev.
solve it in 24 hours, but my peace team's never going to come to
Oh my
Kiev."
god.
Oh my God, seriously, how's that going to be solved in 24 hours if you're never going to send your
I
peace
have a
team to
whole
Kiev?
range of punchlines that just kicked in there of other people who've been here
It
before
just
these
doesn't
guys.
stop. It takes the oxygen out of them. This is a thing I keep telling people. When I did my talk, I was just saying, you've got the biggest
Yeah,
land war in Europe since World War II. You've got Putin that's done it with the most outrageous war crimes, still committing terrorism in Ukraine. Yet Trump takes the oxygen out of him. He's monopolising the papers, the news. I mean,
Well,
it's ideal for Putin.
of the two monkeys on camera, you're the only one who was allowed out of the cage. What do they ask of us abroad?
Well, to be honest, I always tell people there's a at the border of Ukraine and Europe, there's a media wall, and same coming in, same going out. You've got essentially the people in Ukraine don't
Mhm.
really understand. They see the bad side of it, so they see the Trumps through social media. We you know because we're not blocked, we don't have to use a VPN to check X
True.
or Western social media. We're
Absolutely. I
not
can get
blocked
all of
from
it
the
full blown
media.
effect just for
So
free.
so they get to see all the shit stuff. So when I go out, generally people want to know what's going on in here because they don't get to read the Ukrainian or understand it what it's like on the
Ah,
ground. So I don't know whether you've seen that film Tom Hanks called The Newsreader or the Newsman
no,
or
no,
something
I
like that.
haven't.
It's like an old Western film where he just goes and reads the papers from what's going on around the world to the locals in America. You sort of end up doing that here to the speaking groups in Ukraine, we're teaching them English, but they want to know what's going on in Canada and America.
Sure,
So you end
sure.
up doing your class talking about geopolitics, which is kind of interesting because they're asking you questions in English and we're teaching them English and they want to know, so how
Right.
is it? Why does Trump hate us? Why do Americans hate us? Because your average Ukrainian doesn't know that it's only 20%. There's actually quite a lot of support for Ukraine. And one of the reasons I was going to go to America beforehand was to do the America Canada trip to come back here and then do some journalism about that trip and
Mhm.
about the support for Ukraine. But I had to bin off and cancel my America trip because at that time when I was arranging it, Trump was going at war with Greenland and Canada. So, and then we had the reports that the Russians were abusing Interpol, which meant that I
Right.
didn't want to get a red notice or anything if I went to America. Not that I did before the Americans listening, sort of. You know this, but before the other Americans listening, thinking that America's going to extradite me to Russia to fulfill my prison sentence. I don't think that's going to be the
You never
case,
know with that with this latest
but
administration.
it could make my life shitty. And getting back into Ukraine if I do have a red notice and America decide that they want to, you know, act on that. So it is a bit difficult one. So I thought better to err side of caution and cancel the America trip rather than get caught in an invasion between America and Canada and America and Greenland at the time. And besides, I promised now that I would never go to America while Trump's in charge because he's just I promised I wouldn't swear this time because
Pretty
last time
much.
I was there, but he's a wanker, an absolute wanker. Um,
He's a pure
so
bellend, bro. He's a pure
it
bellend.
is, yeah, absolutely. That's considering that we've got a madman in Russia who's decided he wants to invade West and commit, ethnic cleansing and genocide. It's a pretty big order that you're number one and you're an American leader, and you're getting the headlines and you're getting the air and the space on the media, and Putin is just
Yeah,
second
and that's the
fiddle.
point of the fact that Trump wakes up obsessed, like ravenously obsessed that a comedian made a comment of any kind, and it's always a different comment. It doesn't have to be she had that widow look about her or whatever the comment was.
Well,
Um,
Zelensky's a comedian, you know.
well, actually, and
Jimmy
that was the
Kimmel.
point. That's actually, I
It's
like to try
everything.
to explain to our viewers what inspires an actual article versus an impulse to just, have something to say about it, but like, at the article. And it's because
Unfortunately, you do, Thomas. You have an American leader, unfortunately. Not very
yes,
popular.
is the fact that Zelensky is a comedian was actually also the thrust of the article. Trump fears comedians more than the mob boss,
Yeah, that's a
and
good article.
it's because I mean, like consistently, there's something about comedians and the ability to deal with someone like Trump, and yet he has no problem telling you how much he loves his good friend Kim Jong Un, and he has no problem getting along with the Taliban. He has no problem getting on with his great friend Putin and Xi. We're so good with Xi. But a comedian on late night television makes one comment and he cannot sleep. Now, I have some OCD nights, I have nights where I um, I couldn't get the transcript to finish. I've been uploading the video to get it done, and it wasn't working. And I didn't sleep throughout the night because it's not a complete task. So I totally understand being like obsessed with work, but it's not Jimmy Kimmel and Vladimir Putin on my table. Well, it is with
He's
Vladimir
calling
Putin.
for him to get. Am I right? He's calling for him to get the sack now on a joke before the attempted assassination of him
Y-
or second one.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, that's just. But and the joke is about the age difference between him and Trump,
yeah. She's my
between his
age.
wife and
That robot lady and I are the same age. Her make
the
and
one who
model
likes
was,
she's sucking a lemon.
yeah, that make and model was produced on the assembly line in the same year I was.
We'll probably get called to get the sack now after I just cracked a joke there. Actually, I get my visa revoked. That's what I'm sort of waking up in the morning thinking I
I'm
got to have a
trying
10-year
to.
visa for America. You're a citizen. What do you mean? Trying to get my citizenship revoked. I'm not sure you're expected to do that. But I got a visa and I can't half expecting it. And when I read on the news, it says, it says things like, if you badmouth the government and you don't believe what we're doing, what believe in what Trump's doing, we're going to revoke your visa. And I'm like, maybe
Well,
I
it
should
does
delete
affect you
those
guys
JD Vance
differently.
memes.
I did think about that we have different realities, and not just us. In some seriousness, we have friends that come and go who have really had to change how they operate when it comes to not only the United States but other countries. And it's like you mentioned the weaponization of Interpol. That's just one of them. You know, we have Donald Trump playing the same game. It was a time when we had only a handful of dictatorships that you would have to avoid, and now we have the one that was supposed to be the counter dictatorship, the United States. You
Yeah,
know,
it's sad. It's not longer the free world, that's for sure. I mean, I'm seeing the
hey,
rhetoric
Norwood
come
love
up.
this
That's
right
good.
now. The king took the piss. Hey, see, you're British.
Yeah. Yeah. That's why we did this. I got a Brit here and an American there, and it makes perfect sense to just gel the two together.
I watched all of King Charles III's speech, and I wrote up a piece. I didn't put the piece out because it didn't satisfy where I feel I had something so great and unique to say. But also, I got stuck on the title "Return of the King" or "King's Speech." Both of them were like taken.
I'm not being
Um,
funny, but our royalty hasn't got the best record at the moment, but it's still way above. We're still way above Trump. We've got Andrews
but he
connected
said,
to the
"Oh
Epstein
yeah,
files. We've
exactly."
got flipping Diana was
But
killed
they
in a
took
road
action
tunnel.
with him. They took action with him.
Yeah, they
But
did. Yeah,
I
yeah, they
read through
did.
his commentary, and he literally went through areas that are at the meta level. They address MAGAism with this almost genteel, "Oh, you little people," and how
I was
you
against
strayed
the
so
state
far.
visit, as you know. I was dead
Yeah,
against it. I wrote a piece about it saying I did against it only for the reason because we're ignoring the values. I mean, he's already insulted our veterans, insulted our troops in
sure.
Afghan, our commitments there. He's got involved in our politics, which he shouldn't do. He's,
Yeah,
him and Vance are getting involved with the far right in the UK. I mean, it's disgusting what they've done to Hungary. They're trying to do to the UK.
right,
So
right.
it is really disgusting. And I said that's no way that shouldn't warrant a state visit. And I don't mind if I'm wrong in that. I thought Charles done a blinding job. I thought he was amazing,
Yeah,
diplomatic, very careful. Where they got that Trump bell from, I have no idea. But I think that I wrote in my article on Substack, which is only for paid subscribers, because it's quite it's quite. I have Voices Unfiltered, which is a bit more of my view, so I do that behind a paywall. But I was saying on there that this is last chance saloon. This is a way of saying you keep on, and this is not going to go. I couldn't see it going any way, other than this is your last sort of warning, but a nicey British way of doing
right.
it. And then the next day, he's already poo-pooing Charles and dismissing the trip and saying things like, "Well, he would help us out, but the British government." probably, didn't get involved in Iran. You didn't tell anybody about Iran. You just went off and did it, and you clearly don't understand how NATO works. And we were there for you in September. That's what Charles was there saying. Hold on a
Right.
minute, buddy. We were all there for you, and doing it in front of everybody was genius because it's not an individual. You're not talking about it just in front of Trump and his posse and his team and ambushed like Zelensky was at the White House. You're doing it in front of Congress. You're doing it in front of senators. You're doing it in front of the world's media, the American media domestically. And Charles came across really well, Camilla, I thought. I am a royalist. I serve my British Army. I'm incredibly proud to serve my Queen and King. Um, but I did think that, and I don't mind being proved wrong, but I did think this was going a bit too far to give him a state visit based on what he'd said. And I still stick to that now. But I will back up what Charles said. I think it was a brilliant done speech, comedic as well as important, and probably maybe I can accept that I probably got that wrong because that's just outlined everything that I'm just talking to you about. That Charles has managed to get out to Congress and senators and the American population, which is good.
Right. Well, the piece I did not put out was the King's speech was how Charles III used the 250 years of history to dismantle every argument MAGA has ever made to their faces
Yeah,
in their
yeah, yeah,
house
yeah.
and on their birthday.
I like the joke
Uh,
he said about the 250 years, or as we like to say in England, just the other day.
just the other day, yeah, exactly. Um, but that he drew a lot of parallels around the best of what we mythologize Americans mythologize
Absolutely.
ourselves around, and then what we do. And he skipped everything else on the world stage, went straight to Ukraine, which
Yeah.
Molodets, like I
And
was
NATO straight after that saying, we're in this
correct,
together, and Europe, NATO is spending more. It's the only thing I agreed with Trump about is that, NATO and the UN shouldn't rely upon America. I've been saying that for quite a long time. That's not
right,
new. But I think the racquetball approach and then the alternative agendas that Trump's going on, and then now it's got to the point where he's actually pro-Russian and spewing, Russian propaganda in the White House is just disgusting. I mean, you can tell that. Yeah, I agree with him on that, but that wasn't his motive. His motive is to undermine Europe, pull at NATO, all the things Putin needs to succeed
hmm
in winning this war, which he's losing. He's now losing. We were saying about the power shift quite a while ago now.
hmm
I think in sort of January, I was saying there's a significant power shift. And now we're at the point where that power shift's happened. The power has shifted. I mean, clearly it's shifted to the point where we're hitting those refineries. Perms looking, I put a picture up today of Perms saying, the colours, the Russian
right.
landscape colours looking amazing today. Look at that. It's like all these oranges and reds and Perms up in flames, and the other one's got hit a fourth time. And and they're really struggling internally. And all Trump's doing is shielding that. And we're talking about Trump again, but he's shielded and deflected the problems of, that hour talk is Putin using every card he's learned in the KGB to try and deflect what's going on at home and give him a point scoring win with his domestic audience, even down to the Victory Day parade. It's all linked. I'm going to have a word with Trump, and he's going to tell me, yeah, I should think you should have a ceasefire. Trump's brain is mashed potato. He doesn't understand that, this is all linked to propaganda
Which I think is his
in
son's
Russia.
call sign name.
It should be brains mashed potato. It should be his call sign, Trump's call sign. I mean, his brain's fried. I mean, he had, this is the thing that hit me. So on that chat the other day, he
hmm
said he had a line. So he was going the pro-Kremlin route. It was definitely regurgitating what Putin said to him on the phone. Definitely regurgitating. But somehow he got it confused with Iran.
Right.
And then suddenly it just went to a bag of dicks. I mean, it was just an absolute debacle. And I just sat there. Wait, when Frontline and Times Radio talked to me yesterday in an interview, the first thing I said was like that. And they were going, "You all right?" I said, "Yeah, I just watched Trump last night. I'm infuriated, to be fair." And she went, "Good, talk about it." And I did. I was like on Times Radio talking about, trying to keep my P's and Q's together and keep my British etiquette
Mhm.
and everything intact, because it's the Times Radio, which is extremely hard sometimes. But I did manage to get across a good interview to sort of say, yeah, I mean, that's just what we were. All I was waiting for him to say was, yeah, Kupiansk has just been liberated. Like
Right.
Gerasimov does to fucking Putin every two weeks. So, it was that sort of out of the Kremlin textbook and out of the Kremlin propaganda that it just seemed all Russian, and I couldn't believe how it wasn't picked up so much by domestic American press, but certainly on social media and
Because they're
everyone else
no
going,
longer
"Hold on a minute, what?"
journalists. Because they are no longer journalists. They are stenographers now. And
Yeah,
while you were
yeah,
gone,
yeah, yeah.
dear brother, doing your hard work abroad as a missionary of truth.
Oh,
No,
I'm going to
I've
steal that.
been yeah, it's yours. No, I pointed out after the shooting and the subsequent press conference in 60 Minutes that they don't ask good questions that if you had that access you should be asking.
Because he
Um,
just gets rid of you out of the White House if you do. I mean, if you're a
there's
woman,
that. There's that.
if you're a woman, I mean,
Yeah,
you're really struggling anyway, because
yeah,
he will pick on you because you're a woman.
yeah.
The
There's all these
misogynistic
considerations, but
dipshit in him.
they also know. Is an interesting thing about extremists that I think also holds true of this administration. If you only have the illegitimate press, the influencers, whatever you want to call it, ecosphere up there, you don't reach the ecosphere you need. So you need to give some room at the table for a CNN, an AP, someone who can basically take that message and put it into the mainstream.
Mm.
And then yeah, you can load it like 90% even if necessary with the rest of the shitbags they currently have. Now, that being considered, um, we can tell that even then, and I had this problem here with CNN, in fact, here in Kyiv, and I think you would appreciate this because I've talked to you about this. Um, and to our viewers, I'll tell you a journalistic lesson I learned the hard way too. Sitting in front of this guy Volodymyr Zelensky, and I don't have my name thing here, but I don't raise my Nasdaq Media name placard in front of everyone else and ask the question. And the time goes by, and I don't get a question. And then I get a question from a POW mom here who says, "You were in front of my president, and you didn't ask about my son."
Mm. I've had something
Now,
similar. I
why
was
that
with
hurt
Lubinets and got the
was
same.
you were with who?
Lubinets, and I
Oh
was
yeah,
with
yeah,
him,
Luminous.
and
Yeah, yeah, Dmitry Luminous, right.
some couple of mums text me and said, "Did you talk about my son?" I was like, "No, it's not. You don't. I'm talking about everybody, not specifically one person.
Right,
He
right.
doesn't know that. It's very difficult." So I know where you're coming from with that.
So here's what happened though, is because we're talking about CNN as an example, is that I could not help but flash back to what was the question CNN actually got on the table. Now I deferred, right? I'm like, there's CNN, they reach billions. Who am I? I don't reach billions. Okay, it makes sense. And what does CNN ask? Oh, under what conditions would you consider transfer of territory or something to that effect? Like they always ask. And Zelensky gave the look, like really? Okay, and answered they kind of non-answer, non-answer, which means think about what I did not get to have happen there because I deferred to the grand, big, super megaphone that asked a dumb ass question. And
Yeah.
BBC's done the same thing. And so the thing is about like independent journalism. This is a bringing it back home to my friend Sean. Make sure you subscribe to Sean's account. We're not going anywhere. We're only in the I
No.
think first 45 minutes of our 4-hour marathon, so we're good. Um, but make sure you're subscribed, and make sure you're paying attention to what he's writing, because um, we're not stenographers. That's
No,
just what we're not.
no.
We may be a lot of other things, but we are not
It's growing
stenographers.
too. I mean, it's like the interview I did yesterday. They asked me, how did you get into journalism? I said, I'm not sure I could have done anything else. To be honest, I want to work in Ukraine, and to be honest, what can you do as a former POW and an ex sniper? What can I do? It's like what else am I going to do? What can I offer a company? Probably not. I can shoot Nat's ass at 300 meters. It's like, and I'm a former POW. Do you want resistance training? It's like, but I can't speak. I can't speak about losing a home and my wife losing a home, and not one home but two homes to Russian invaders. I can speak about East Ukraine because, like you, I'm one of the few people that lived there, especially East Ukraine, where I lived here since the last
Right.
8, 10 years. So I am a Russian, learned predominantly Russian first, for those that don't know. So, I am one of the Russian speakers that apparently Putin was liberated, except for he stole my house, killed my friends, jailed me, give me the death penalty, and that gives me a good basis to. I'm never going to be
Ugh,
neutral. I'm always going to be Ukrainian sort of biased, but I think I've got every right to explain why. That gives
right.
me a story that people listen to and resonate with and understand that we've been through the mill. And again, like you just come to that calling where you just think, I don't want. I want to tell people about what's going on here. I think I made that decision day 3 of 2022. Largely been in the military and under the radar.
Yeah.
I literally had to make that decision of whether I was going to start telling people what was going on because I didn't think I'd make it through the day because it was that intense. And I think that's
Right.
just carried on from that point. I'm never one to just, sit there and just take the shit that's being dished out, especially by, Putin and reinforced by Trump's administration. So, I don't care if it makes me unpopular. I mean, we're going through that with a lot of diehard supporters, but I'm seeing them weighing off, which is something I don't really talk about much. I used to get, a couple of years ago, I used to get tons of hate mail and stuff. Now I don't get much at all. What we're saying is actually resonating. The prime one being when I was saying 12 months ago, 12, 15 months ago, when I was going, look, if Russia economically collapses, we could march into the occupied territories without a shot being fired. And you fast forward 15 months, when I was getting laughed at then, people are calling me in for interviews now going, well, we're actually talking about that now. It's like there's a big budget deficit and,
Yeah, the cut
the
through
social
Zaporizhia
media and
comment
Russia's
that I
turning on
made.
them.
Yeah, the cut through Zaporizhia comment I made started feeling a little different about 2 weeks ago when I was watching a Ukrainian commander explain where some things were. And he goes, "Well, if you look right through here," and I'm like, "Right through where, my friend? Where?" Because we had maps during the liberation of Kherson that I was putting all the, and I hate the word liberation, it's thrown around easily because if you've never been to places that were liberated, there's nothing left of these places. So, but a lot of these places that were liberated throughout Kherson, they went into pure information blackout mode in October 2022, like
Mm.
full stop, and on my end, a data collector who's trying to make sense of things, I was okay with that. I went, okay. And I went on to other research and then went back to my notes, saw, how close we were, continued tracking, and still do this now, to kind of keep track of what they say about these regions and what happens. And largely, I'm going to use what you just said about personal investment or personal tie. And I'm trying to think of like per sec for other people. But I have a lot of occupied family to consider. And so I don't see what happens on the map as just something over there in some place that's unfortunate. It's somewhere. It's a place where someone I know is in harm's way. Was immediately affected by. Or there's a flip side to a coin we may think is good on our end because it affects forces, but it also affects civilians in
Mm.
the same areas, blackouts and stuff.
Well, on that
Yeah,
subject, well,
yeah,
that
go for
trip
it.
to Canada was exceptionally emotional because the deaths in, you think it's another continent, a million miles away, but it's got so many connections to uh, Bakhmut and
Yeah,
Irpin and the front lines per cross because they're losing people, family members, and no much so than a Canadian Nathan, who Nolan, sorry, who was, came over to volunteer, who was killed in Ukraine. So an actual Canadian volunteer who lived in Edmonton, whose
hmm
mum came to really talk about a son and a brother, brought a family,
hmm
and that's the connection this war has to people on the other side of the world now, the continent.
right,
Anybody who's connected to Ukraine, or Brits or Canadians that have volunteered to come here, they're now sharing their ultimate sacrifice with the country, and even though they're Canadians, Brits, Swedes, Danish guys, Norwegians, Americans that have come here to
right,
volunteer and ultimately died. So Pokrovsk and Kyiv and all these obscure places you hear on the front lines now are resonating with people in the continent, which again is now having an impact, which I didn't really living here all the time, being a Brit. You think you'd know that, but you don't until you go back home to the UK and said, "Do you know so and so? Yeah, he died out in Ukraine." Or, "Do you know this? He died out in Ukraine." I said, "Where did he die?" And they know this random town outside Kopiansk, or somewhere in near Kharkiv, or Kramatorsk. And these people that you wouldn't know these towns or these areas at all, are now reciting these places on the front lines because they know
right.
people that have died there, which is extremely. What do you do when a brother comes up and says, "My brother died in Ukraine"? I was like, "Oh, really? Sorry, brother. I've lost some friends too, pal. Do you want me to sign your book?" There's not much you can really say to a mum that's in Canada that's paid the ultimate sacrifice. It's deeply emotional.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, I have contacts with some Americans who lost someone here and that I stay in contact with, but not many, like because I didn't come and go. Um, and then largely in the favor realm,
Mm.
someone, abroad said, well, I know a guy who lives there, me, and maybe he can help. So I'm on photo replacement duty at our Memorial Hill here in Kyiv. So as those photos wear down in the sun, I get the request to go check. And now that spring is here, I've already, checked the other day when I was over there. But yeah, I mean, I want one thing I want to ask you because of the Canadian diaspora. Now, I'm sure you didn't have time to get into the politics, et cetera, because my natural born Ukrainians running into diaspora has been a very interesting conversation. They really see the world very differently,
Yeah.
radically differently. It's a very interesting conversation. But are there some interesting questions or interesting things that came out of those conversations that you really didn't expect to hear abroad? Uh,
Yeah, I did expect to be with the being Ukrainian. I didn't
mhm,
expect to hold the audience as much as I did.
mm,
Being a
okay,
Brit, do you know what I
sure,
mean? I
sure.
thought being I don't speak the language fluently. I can't say culturally I know a bit about Ukraine, but my wife would say, "You're not an expert, Sean, on Ukraine. You know that, right?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I know." But I sort of sit there and know a bit more than most foreigners. That thank you. um, Literally. So I was half expected to. Did my research on some stuff. I wanted to be on the nail with my
Mm,
presentation, my talk for about an hour and a half with some questions at the end.
mhm,
Thinking, I spoke to the general feel of people. I said, "What's it going to be like when I get there?" Because obviously I talk to people that roughly know the region, but you guys are like Ukrainians, and you know it's a slightly different talk. And he said
Hmm.
one of the questions he said you'll probably get asked, "What do you think about Zelensky?" And I went,
Oh
I
yeah,
wasn't expecting that actually. So it gave me a good indication what to prep for. But when I did my talk, it was just silent, and I thought initially that um, we had some laughs through it because my talk is quite a dark subject, so I bring some humour into it.
yeah,
So people laughed at the right times and torch, and but when the questions come, it was just generally because people were absolutely shocked. Um, and then the questions started coming for the next hour. And we had that in Toronto,
mm,
we had that in Edmonton. Questions that I thought they would know, they didn't. And
interesting.
then generally they were saying you just brought the war here because we have speakers, but they're not gone through what you've gone through, lived where you'd lived, and you speak English as well, which makes life you're able to uh, vocalize better or emotionally some of the things you went through than maybe say a Ukrainian would go,
Hmm.
and not give it that same sort of feel because
Right,
of it's a second or third language, and that I realized then why they're not getting on the news, the press, which made me even more sort of push me even more to think about going to America when the time's right and doing this again, uh, because of what happened in Canada and actually resonating with people out there and understanding what's going on and what's the worst things that can happen, and also telling them that it's not as bad as you think actually, and why. You just see the
right,
news.
right.
You see bombs coming in. You don't realise that Dnipro's the size of Birmingham and 1 million people.
Yeah, and
That
this
when
point
these
was made
missiles
about
come in, it's just a small area that gets hit.
yeah, and this point was made about Rubio making a comment about how everything was so destroyed that his comment it was a year ago, if you remember roughly, and that his comment was so like it's all over type of tone that made like that, who would suddenly think it's good to send more resources? So when
Political framing. That's
yeah,
all it is
when
now, and we're
you
starting to
make that
see that.
framing like that, it winds up staying that way when that's not the accurate picture.
Yeah,
This is why I use the metaphor of a burning house to show that X like okay, so the garage is on fire. Okay, well we can rebuild the garage. Okay, but if we let the whole thing burn, okay, are we going to just let the whole thing burn down? If we are, just say so, so we can evacuate. Um, but when we don't treat it like that,
that's a
we
great
sort of
analogy. Actually, I'm
yeah
going to steal that. It's a
take
chip
it.
pan fire, but we put it
Yeah,
out. But the house is on fire. No, it
yeah,
was a chip pan fire, and we put it out.
yeah,
The rest of the rooms were all right. It's just around the
yeah,
cooker's a bit singed. And you
yeah,
sort of got that with, I wouldn't say that with cities like Mariupol that were just obliterated, but certainly
yeah,
since
exactly.
the lines have stalled and they can't advance. Certainly now, I would say when the attacks come in, is something like Dnipro is quite a good analogy to use. Is that
Yeah,
it's there's a lot of Dnipro that's still fired and not being hit. Dnipropetrovsk, there's a lot of Dnipropetrovsk, which is 2 hours on the front line, that's not getting any shells, any
right,
sort of stuff. So it tells you that Russia doesn't have the facility to be able to hit everywhere all of the time. Because
right.
just before this last 2 weeks of shells and ballistics coming in, and ballistics and drones coming into Dnipro, we had like 2 or 3 weeks of not one single drone or ballistic coming in.
Yeah,
Everywhere else was Kyiv, Lviv. It tells you that it's hand to mouth. They haven't got enough going on, rounds coming in. They haven't got enough equipment to hit everywhere all the time, so they have to shift it round a bit. Um, you know,
and if there's one thing I've learned doing certain research work around smart peoples, um, the most important part for people to understand about certain types of sanctions is that if it takes keeping a bomber out of the air because of one fucking bolt, then keep one bomber out of the air because of one fucking bolt.
well, did you see the news tonight?
And that actually is something that occurs
They just
in
hit
yeah,
some Gen 5 fighters in the airfields that just been
exactly.
released today, which is a big hit. 4 of them.
Exactly.
Uh, so that's a massive hit. And they're saying they're taking out those because that's saving lives. And that's what
Exactly.
Ukraine's doing daily. They've just spent the last several months taking out all the air defense. around Crimea and all around the
Yeah.
area, as we call it, and that's now
Taking
having
out
dividends.
expensive big systems with very inexpensive, munitions.
And that's what's leading the pressure on to Putin now, because he can't protect any of his businesses now, which is, oligarchs want their money and their holiday homes in Paris, and that's essentially where we sit now. Is Ukraine are now hitting all these airfields and all these refineries and all these
That's right.
command nodes, and Russia can't advance. And as I keep saying to people, most Russian soldiers that are going to get conscripts will never see a Ukrainian trench. They will die in the form-up points, the routes in, the command centers, the start lines, the harbor areas. They would die in all those places in the thousands before maybe a few might sprinkle into the front lines, because those front lines are 100 kilometers wide now. So
Exactly.
you're not gonna, it's not, Russia's still doing full frontal assaults and driving down in straight lines with armored vehicles and combined arms, and not really changing in some areas. They're still doing what they were doing in 2022, which is why you're seeing military bloggers in Russia now turn on Putin, and why they're now,
Right.
even with all the
Yeah,
stringent laws.
I was explaining Russian milsec yesterday on a podcast to someone who doesn't really cover this topic directly. How by watching Russian milsec you can kind of tell what's going on
Yeah, it's a good good
in the
guide
Kremlin.
barometer.
Yeah.
And you don't need to speak Russian. You can just follow them through translations and social media, and you could get an idea that they're not happy. They're
Yeah.
and X, when Starlink was really turned off for them here, that's when it really hit high. And Putin did that with a knee-jerk reaction of banning Telegram next, which must have killed so many Russians who used that, because Starlink was turned off. They use Telegram. It's become a battlefield platform. It's big in Ukraine before the war.
Right.
It's Russia's number one app. They use it for quick get arounds and quick messaging, and to raise money for the troops at the front. Putin just turned it off. You can imagine that upsetting quite a few people with guns. It's like,
Exactly. Hey, what do you
yeah,
think
and I,
about the? You heard Sersky has announced that shorter rotations at the front and
yeah,
some changes in
long
order to.
overdue.
Yeah.
Long overdue. I'm a big critic of mobilisation, and I don't get
Yeah.
arrested for it. I'm a big critic about rotations and time on the front. There's nothing you can do if you're encircled like me and you're spending 7 weeks fighting. There's not much you can really do. But if the lanes the lines have stabilised, there's no reason why if it's safe, you shouldn't be looking at quick rotations. And that should be you know that's long overdue. And I think they're changing it at the start of June. I think they're bringing in these new parameters, right? Where they've got a new
Right.
battlefield conditions and stuff. That's progress. That's because we're not reactive. That's because we're now commanding the battlefield. If you know anything about the military, regaining initiative after you've lost it is one of the hardest things you can do on the battlefield.
Right.
Ukraine have not only done this once, they've done this 2 or 3 times. Remember
Hmm.
when we had the artillery shortages, when we
Yeah.
had no shells coming in, because Trump, before his inauguration, was stopping the shells and the military aid coming in. We
Is
lost the
intergym
battlefield
period
then.
exactly?
We've now got that back then. We've then lost it a bit because we weren't allowed to bomb anywhere in Russia. We've now clawed that back. We've got innovation back. We've regained this battlefield initiative at least 2 or 3 times in the Russians, which tells you how
And
shit they
finding
are.
finding that the domestic product ability will allow exports
Yeah, I mean,
is
he's built
amazing.
up. Trump's shooting himself in the foot because one,
No cards, baby.
he doesn't want to deal with Ukraine, and Ukraine have now had to go to the Middle East and other business partners because America doesn't want Trump. Sorry, the Trump administration doesn't want anything to do with Ukraine, which is very short term, very stupid thing, considering in that them and Russia are the only people that's fought in a war like this ever.
Exactly.
You know,
Exactly.
and data's the one that's winning the war, is now winning the war for Ukraine. Innovation, data, and mass produced on the cheap, and that's now winning the war. Precision is beating mass. when it comes to
And
Russia.
trying to
Russia's stuck in a
offload the
Soviet doctrine.
well, and trying to offload the finger, memory, the muscle memory, conditioning that's happened here, not just with Ukrainians, but also with British and American soldiers who have essentially strong muscle memory of fighting the Russians and fighting Shahed drones if that's the AO that they get, shipped to deal with. And this has been very frustrating to even as recent as this week here that Americans who have the ability to share that knowledge were blown off by Americans around the Secretary of War. Uh,
It's a real paradox there somewhere. I mean, Trump literally this week spouting Russian propaganda, who's lifted, waived sanctions on Russian oil at sea
exactly.
for a Russian army that's supplying Iran with intelligence and modified drones just killing American personnel. I keep saying it week on week. Why is this not front page news? Why is this not being brought into the public domain more? I mean, essentially, he's funded Putin 700-800 million a day in
Mhm.
revenues to target US personnel, and they've already had 13 dead, nearly 400 injured. Since starting Iran, it's going to take one battlefield incident where lots of Americans lose their lives before this ever gets brought up.
Right.
Unfortunately, because that's where he's got loyalty. He's already lost Syria, Venezuela. He's lost control of that. Iran
He's
looks like
essentially operatively he's lost Hungary for now.
he's going to stick with Iran. He's going to pump money into that. So where's that money going? It's going to go into supporting Iran. It's going to go into supporting Russia's allies.
Right.
Trump's just waived sanctions on it again. So this is
The thing
exceptionally
is,
odd,
the thing I
would
said
be the
about
word.
Trump that I would say about Trump now is the same thing I said about him after he ordered the execution of Soleimani. Is that the concern should always be he has no strategy. That it's
Yeah, absolutely none.
an item to happen and that's it.
I'm going to go
No
out on a
sense
limb
of
here.
before and no cascading effect. Yeah, go for it.
Hear what I say here, because this you can tell me to shut up if I'm on the wrong thing here. If, and I've never been a believer in this until recently, but if there is compromise on Trump, if Russia does have compromise on Trump, you can bet your bottom dollar Mossad's got it, China's got it,
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah,
and how quick, without telling anybody, did Trump go in to help Israel on this Iran thing? How
yeah.
quick? I mean, do they have something on him? These questions keep getting asked. I say, and
Well,
I'm not a
you
conspiracy guy.
said
And I
that.
keep going, no, I can't see that
Well,
happening.
you
But
said that you don't. You always held against that, and you and I are actually very similar. And I have a different version of that, which is that they don't need it because it's a different category that applies with him, and that the different category that applies with him is basically strongman kind of, autocracy impulses he naturally has. So, whereas he does not have an ideology, his ideology is rooted closer to autocracy
mm,
thinking. So, it's an easy go-to for him to want a top-down autocratic sphere under him. Now, that being said, well, if we were to look at how we got there as Americans, and I've been saying this, hitting it with no kings is nice, and I appreciate no kings, etc.
I know where you're going with this.
Uh, but I still strongly believe that people need to get out of having an anti-Trump um, remedy plan, meaning that the only way
Yeah.
to get rid of Trump is to have an anti-Trump figure by which we go at Trump with it. No, like it has to be you guys. Like I'm talking to every person right now. I'm gonna even look at the little dot on my phone, which is always weird, um, and say you're where the revolution begins and ends. Period. In between your ears, behind your
Don't wait
eyes.
for the midterms.
Don't wait for the midterms. Make your changes today.
Do it
Um,
now.
so when we keep deferring to someone else to be that role model, and I totally understand the impulse, um, it sort of hopes that someone else will come up with a magic remedy, and that ain't gonna get us anywhere.
They ain't going to get anywhere. That's how you ended up in this shit.
Yeah.
You're going to end up like Russia if you don't do something where you're just submissive and not do anything and just blame everybody else because you're getting bombed and your refinery's blowing up and oil rain is pouring on you, and it's that's where you're going to end up if you don't stop someone like Trump
Well, like
doing what
here,
he's
who
doing.
was the anti-Yanukovych? There was not an anti-Yanukovych. There might have been someone like Klitschko that you saw in the crowd, but he was not the anti-Yanukovych figure. There was not a specific figure who was the anti-Yanukovych.
No,
It was the people were sick of it, and then they figured out someone who could do the job. And then
things you don't
now,
hear in Ukraine. That Yanukovych is a good guy. He should come back.
right, yeah, for all these people, it was a coup. Really,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's a coup. Really? Why does
So
nobody want him back then?
where's his supporters? They're like, we want him back.
Where's his supporters? It's like nobody wants him back. Not even the Russian guys want him back.
I'm
You
about to
know,
lose my I'm about to lose my Iranian constituents tonight. It's like I don't have to reach far to find a Pahlavi supporter in my life or something like that. That's the point you're making as well. I can't find. I don't know anyone who's a regime supporter, but I don't have to work hard to find a Pahlavi supporter in the
yeah,
Iranian
yeah,
community.
yeah,
But find me a Yanukovych supporter in the
yeah. It's
Ukrainian
just not here.
diaspora. It's
They're all
just
in Moscow. That's why.
yeah, right. Or they're in Belgium typing and texting on behalf of Moscow. But it's not a thing. And back to the point of not having an anti figure. It's also so that people are not just waiting until November and hoping that because that's too late. You have to take
It's too late.
action as often as possible and whatever means are available to you reasonably. Don't be that guy running down the hallway really fast like a blur with your gun. That was dumb. Whatever happened, I don't know. I don't know.
Whatever that was
I don't know
just
what happened at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. I see a video, but that type of stuff is also what I don't mean. Just in case it needs to be said, that's dumb.
I don't
Um,
believe in whacking presidents, even if they are dicks.
no, I believe in
Yeah,
actually. I'll go even further because I said this about Dick Cheney, and I hold this as a principle. If I was ever to say that he deserved the ultimate penalty, it would never be without the ultimate jury because it's the jury of Americans that counts.
yeah, it
It's
is.
that's really the only thing. See, like if someone says, "Yeah, but the ends were the same." No, the ends would not be the same if the people had not changed how he got there. Which is actually why I wanted to take this route for a minute, is to say that the people who say some of these things about Ukrainians in America or wherever they're at, it's because back home there are people saying that about people in Ukraine or abroad because in
Exactly.
some
Yeah, yeah.
place in Texas, some place in Arkansas or Mississippi, wherever it's at, there are people who are saying these ignorant and disinformed things on their local radio. Even I've read local newspapers in small town America that no one should even have the time to be
Yeah,
writing
that's
weird
my
shit,
biggest
and
thing
there's
I'm
people
talking
who
about at the
write.
moment.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Sorry, I just literally I
yeah, go for
jump
it.
on that because
Take
yeah, too
it, take it.
many people commentating on this war that are nowhere near the country, nowhere near the region, not even in
Yeah,
Europe. America, unfortunately, is probably the worst one for it.
yeah,
Because of the high profile social media guys that have actually never stepped foot in Ukraine, don't understand what's going on here, who
yeah,
have a
exactly.
view and they don't really understand, or they're just parroting someone. One of the things I get is, you just don't like Trump. I say, look, as a Brit guy, I couldn't care whether it's not my place to sit there, whether you've got a Democrat or a Republican in there. My friends are all mostly Republican, yet they support Ukraine. I said, but my as a Brit, I don't care if you've got Biden in. I wasn't that great on Biden. I'll give him that.
Mhm.
What for? I called my cat Biden because he was just pissing and shitting. He's 20 years old and lost his memory. That's how much I thought of Biden. So it's like I don't care. But when he's having an impact on where I live, my country. He's lying
Mhm.
and saying he spent 350 billion. He's pretty much calling us Nazis. Vance is saying it's the best thing he's ever done in helping the Russians and stopping aid coming to Ukraine.
Right,
That
right.
means he's helping the Russians. Hold on, I'm responding to what you're doing to my country, your opinions about my country. Yet they're the victim. They're the ones. It's exactly what Russia does. I got an opinion. You don't like it. Oh my God, I'm the victim because you don't like my opinion. Then, and I said I didn't like your opinion. I just said it's wrong. You're not even here. You're not even in the country. And anybody that doesn't put their real name on a handle anyway doesn't really have an opinion, in my view,
Yeah.
because you're a chicken shit motherfucker. To be fair, and if you're going to call me a Nazi and you're called Burger Biter 101 from, and just sit there and go, really?
I
I'm not
remember that
interested.
account.
It's just it's all I can think of the top of my head. But when you get
Right,
someone like that, and it's ended in 645192, and you just go,
right.
clearly you're a bot. Clearly you're like, if you're not a bot, you've got a handle like a bot. You don't have a name there,
You and your
and
163 followers are upsetting me today.
yeah,
Here, Sean, here's one for both of us to laugh at. Ready?
God,
You've been through some things from what I understand. Um,
maybe.
baby. Uh, Similarly, I've been through some things here. Um, and I get to read on the internet. I'm afraid of, or I like this. I'm triggered by um, an account that's got like 120 followers who said something negative about Ukraine. It wasn't the drones that upset me all morning. It wasn't the smell of burning building and all that mixed with Trump phone call. It wasn't that. It was the approximately 135 words on a tweet that just utterly shattered me.
Is that sarcasm?
Kept me from moving. No, but it's funny because I read these
Yeah.
things and I'm like, I'm sorry, on what planet are you a thing that is sucking oxygen somewhere on the other side of the keyboard?
You've got there's a tweet you get that might upset you. It's when they follow me on my emails or get hold of my emails and they say we should have
Oh,
killed you when we had you in Donetsk. Now
God,
that's something
I miss
different and
those.
reportable to the police.
Can you send some of
That's
those to
something
me, like an
different.
ex-girlfriend that you don't get along with? I'll take the emails.
It's just like, well, it's died off a bit now, but generally, occasionally they'll go through a website or grab my email or something like that, and then I'll get this threatening email from, it goes through a filter, and then the filter woman rings me and goes, have you seen this? I'm like, it's
Note
just
to self:
normal.
check
It's
filters
just
to see why I'm not getting
every
Nazi hate
day.
mail anymore.
Yeah.
No Nazi email might be filters engaged. I got threatened
Everybody
by
in my house is a
yeah.
terrorist. My wife, me, I'm a
Oh my.
Nazi terrorist, And
Some
so
of these viewers may
it's
not
just
have
more
heard
off the
this,
duck's
but
back in the end.
the Daily Stormer tried to come after me one time and drew back a nub, and the reporter remembers my enthusiasm. Like I couldn't wait to get some of this. And that's not the calls he was making were not that kind of call. They were like, I'm being tracked by whom? And I was like, I'm being tracked by who? Yeah. Really? And why, what you got? Um,
I'll just say,
uh,
yeah,
and when it dies off, it's kind of like, what do I do? I want my hate mail.
yeah. Yeah, nobody loves me anymore. What's my hate man? I'm
Where's
obviously
my I'm
not
coming
doing
to kill
something
you
right in
email?
this.
I didn't get my I'm coming to kill you. Where's
It's just, I mean, I don't. It makes you a bit thick-skinned now, and yeah, certainly, yeah, I don't let those accounts bother me, especially if they don't have a name. Hey, Alan, good to see you, Senator Brewer.
Usually I'm just letting out my psychopathy, that's all.
Yeah, it's just, yeah, I mean, it is literally. We got some prestigious guests on tonight, by the
In fact, we
way.
do.
Interesting. We do. We have some. We'd like to thank you all actually for coming. We missed the last couple of weeks, but we've got. I think we've got a record amount tonight actually for lifetime views, which is fantastic.
Well, because they want to hear what you have to say. Hey, I want to also share something with you, and I want to thank you for being one of those folks who helps me get this right. I'm working on the captured Marine documentary for Artur and Vladislav's story and their wives, Anastasia and Violetta. And man, getting into the details of the things that are told to the guys in captivity. These are two brothers, both being told your brother signed a deal with us. He'll be with the Russian Ministry of Defense now. So
There were the two brothers
you
in my unit, right?
501s, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, or sorry, sister unit. Yeah,
yeah, 36, yeah.
yeah,
And
36 Brigade. Yeah,
but one of the things that really leapt out, like here's where I get triggered. Remember, we were talking about tweets that trigger me or don't. None of that triggers me. That's just me being mean. No, it's when we couldn't do anything when the tanks were coming in because we had no anti-tank uh, supplies.
yeah.
And I'm
Unfortunately,
like, first thing went through my head is like, I'm Trump. I gave over javelins,
there's like a handful
which,
of javelins that
oh
were
man,
no, you know,
well they
they
were
went in the
stored in,
first 2 weeks.
stored in the West. They had to be stored in
They
Yavoriv or
stored in
somewhere.
the West. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But just that
We got
this
out
is
just
where
on
we
that.
were
We got
at,
our
you know.
anti-tank. We got
Yeah,
our anti-tank weapons about 3 days before the full-scale invasion.
exactly.
No chance to even take one on a range, practice, go through the guys. It was only me that had ever fired one, which made me positively Gandalf in my unit. You know, it's like
Right,
get a Brit guy to go and teach the other guys. So you know, I was the only one, and I fired a Law 94, which was like 30 years ago. So
right,
the
right, right.
optics had changed, and things had changed on it since then, and it was like a new Mark, whatever. So I had to Google that in a PDF file. So we didn't get much time. So I totally agree. We got no anti-tank, and RPGs are shit. You know, at the end of the day, skim off the top. Lucky if you probably get a throw a track or something like that.
Right.
But you know, they're better than nothing. But generally, the anti-tank weapons were very few and far between in Mariupol.
Yeah, and this is one of the things again about journalism versus the other
Journalism.
isms that I don't have much to do with. But journalism is that there's a lot of those lines that would get passed by us when we had people arguing for Ukraine and in a way that was cynical of America's support, that without good journalism skills, it would be okay to nod, or it would seem reasonable to nod with the cynicism. And good journalism means you don't nod during cynicism. It literally means you fight cynicism. You may have skepticism. Skepticism is a great skill to not just believe what you're handed. But
Mm.
cynicism is to have to remove um, the negative on something that was applied artificially. And that's the part that we really want to make sure we're watching for, because when we put a cynical move on top of, I don't mean Russia, we understand those, but even then, analytical point of view, it means you don't want to do it anywhere. You want to make sure that you're dealing entirely with the factual points. And so when I heard about like how weapons came together and who was doing what, when, where, how, I wasn't trying to focus on that. I was focused on human stories. And eventually, uh, I had to go back to the weapons pivot because I didn't want to have those stories go by us without me really having a strong handle about it. But I want to share with our friends. I put this post up the other day, but my friend Artur, who came back in August 14th last year, and his wife Anastasia, who is basically one of my biggest heroes in the whole world. She waited every day for him, and she's one of those quiet leaders. Uh, and then his awesome younger brother Vladi, who
He's the guy I know. He was at our unit for a bit.
exactly,
He's the guy. He's
exactly,
an acrobat as well. He's a bit football
he's
player.
something else, man. Yeah.
Yeah, he's a good lad.
And then his wonderful wife, who's she's so bashful during the entire interview. It was hard to get her to really
Yeah, yeah,
because
yeah.
she's very quiet. And but we got their stories, and I'm getting the edit. I filmed it around Christmas, but after
That'd be cool.
doing work on it, we've got a lot more of the edits going. And again, one of the things that allows us to do this is all of our good supporters who believe in what we're up to. Not just
Yeah,
uh,
thank you, everybody.
not just that we
Keep
come here and talk
sharing.
to you guys, but we keep digging into what's going on. So, what's on your table as we go?
Oh, what's on my table?
What's the most important thing for you to get
What have I
in
got
the
going
next
on?
7 days?
Well, I'm taking some time off Lewis over this bank holiday weekend, and we're going to go shopping and do some picture taking and having some time because I've been away for 10 days or so. So, want a bit of time with the family. You're going to take a bit of time off. And then I'm actually starting a new job with the Times next week, hopefully. So I'll
Hmm.
be working back in doing some more frontline reporting. Now I've got my Ukrainian credentials and my British credentials as a journalist. I can now go to those areas. I mean, I knew the guys
Nice.
there anyway. I could get to the front if I wanted to, but now I'm a journalist. I need the accreditations to get me through, just in case I'm stopped. Um, so I
I
can pretty
love it.
much. I'll be
I
working
call it,
with them next week.
my term is Magic Pass.
Still more Substack. Trying to do some more YouTube videos on my trips, which unfortunately that takes a lot of time. Editing, putting together it, and everything else I do when I do my YouTube gets put to the back burner, which now with Substack sort of taken over and X has taken over everything.
Hmm.
I try and do my YouTube when I can. If I had enough money, I'd pay somebody to do it for me, to be honest. But certainly, I want to be doing some more sort of record video news about what it's like here. And sort of the escalating terrorist side of it that Russia's doing now, the escalating hitting civilians. I'm looking at that more now because I want to get that out into the limelight. The target of civilians, like in Dnipro the other day. It's just I just come back from holiday, so I think now we're in a new phase of journalism for me, where I now got the credentials and I've done my medic course, and now it's just going towards a bit closer to the front to do some reporting, which is I'm really looking forward to. So I'm working with other journalists and getting as much out there as I can, really. And I couldn't do it without the support of everybody that contributes to Voices from the Front and the Substack, and those little and often payments keep me going, and to be able to do it. It's better than a one-off big payment. To be fair, it's regular, and those $3, $8, they contribute a lot. To be able to do this. So, like yourself, they really do, and we're taking Russia to court. So this is a massive thing that's going to happen this
Good.
year in the next couple of months. The paperwork went in the UK. We're now, if we're successful to get our verdict in Kyiv recognised in the UK, we'll be the landmark case and be the first people to really take a state to court for their treatment of us in
Right.
captivity. And that'll open the door up for your colleagues there to then sue the Russian state for damages for the way they were treated in captivity.
Exactly.
And that will set precedents. They can lose billions if we're successful. So that's a massive thing for us to get through. It cost about 10 grand just to put the paperwork into the UK courts. It costs vastly more than that to pay for flights. We're fighting three legal cases in three countries on two different continents. So you can imagine it's getting a little bit expensive. So all those subscriptions that people paid subscriptions pay us really does help to keep us keep moving. So because I hate losing,
It
I don't want to
does.
give it up. I don't want to stop because we've run out of money. So I almost bankrupt myself last year because I was doing it all myself, and before I did Substack, before I did YouTube and commenting on the war. So Substack gives us like you, it gives a bit back to get a bit in return to keep the wheels moving and the joints oiled and to keep going. So that's
And
where we
I'll
sit
say a
now.
special thank you. I try never to name the specific donors so as not to put pressure. They can name themselves and I'll acknowledge if they want. Um, but I hate asking for money. I've always been that way.
It's
Um,
it's difficult.
oh, if my
It's
mom were
really
alive today, I
difficult.
would I would say, hey, could you answer how many times I came to you over money? About what? Exactly. Because that's her way of saying he doesn't come.
Oh,
Um,
Canada was really beneficial. We're writing some articles, we've got some videos coming out, but
yeah.
that was all funded by paid subscribers, donations, subscriptions,
Exactly. And
and
so
everything
what
else. Which
happened is I woke up going, okay, So we got to the end of the month bills coming. When's the studio rent is due in a couple of days. Oh my God. And what do we have on
Yeah,
hand?
yeah.
Oh, not enough. Okay. And I looked in PayPal, and I want to say a special thanks to one of the people who watches who did send a donation that is enough not to be in panic mode. And that's what it's all about. It's not being in panic mode.
Yeah.
Because I'll say this about like, I won't say also another thing I can't name drop, but a person I really, really, really way up on the ladder of supreme monkeys in my life. Um, a person I really admire wrote to me today that she really likes my articles, and it
That
means a
makes a
lot for
big difference.
it means a
It
lot
makes a
from this particular
yeah.
person, without which I probably wouldn't be doing any of this at all, like almost none of it. And and my answer was the same to her as I would say to you guys. It's cathartic. It's like I just go, "You said
Therapy.
what? Oh, hold on a minute." And I just hammer away at my view of how the world operates. And this last week, there's one that just kind of surprised me, but everyone really got into this Laura Loomer article that's got 2,684 likes and 466
How does she fucking do it? I
retweets.
don't know.
Well, the funny reason why it was funny was because she goes all the way to court and says, I've been defamed, but basically her entire reputation is in the mud because of herself, and the court just read back her own stuff to her, like, wait, you're offended? Yeah, but here. And the thing is that I know that there are people like the people who read whatever I've been writing are really smart people. That's one of the cliffhanger parts of writing something, because you got to like entertain smart people.
Yeah.
So how are you going to be smarter than the smart people? You don't be smarter than. Take what you know, take what you're good at, and take what you're really interested in. Just keep doing the thing you do. And
It's a lesson in life there, mate.
in this case, I stick to pretty much my lane. We got a lot of Oath Keeper stuff up here. You mentioned this when we were on the phone, that there were these things that are like too American if you're a Brit, if you come over here, and it's the Trump stuff. But it is my back specialty. And then this, so per our work today, I put up this week in Ukraine, the drone war goes global. Russia's oil booms. Sorry, Russia's oil burns and the front expands inward. And essentially, this is, as I mentioned to you guys last week, these are the headlines according to those roughly 10 to 12 categories of news that I mentioned to you, that I have a system by which I keep track of topics I would otherwise lose, like environmental terrorism. Uh, if you mentioned a couple, I'll go, oh yeah, and I could probably name a few events that have happened that are matter, but they're not what Sean and I talk about. We have our specialties. And I have a lot of Google News alerts and other systems throughout the week that just harvest headlines nonstop. I mean, you name it, I probably have it in a news Google News alert. Rosgardia, every unit, you name it, I've got it in an auto tracking thing. And then what I do is I basically recombine them towards the end of the week, or around the weekend, or maybe once a month, and then try to see what we can learn from all these reports that are really, really busy and big wide nets. And one that I found interesting before we go, that was the article I put out today, "The Enemy of My Enemy: How Ukraine Turned Moscow's Chechens Against Each Other." Now, I have particular Ukrainian official accounts I read pretty much every day. The general staff report, that's like how some of the stuff we didn't go through the numbers tonight, but people hear the numbers a lot in our circles. How many drones were sent this week, how many missiles were intercepted. So if I want to go general staff reports, I can do that. And if I want to go to SBU about collaborators, so I happen to be going to the GUR, the Ukrainian intelligence, and I can, okay, export 1 week of reports, and what do we have? And a very interesting mission took place. They had infiltrated the Akhmat uh,
Oh yeah.
command of the Kadyrov brigade around, Ramzan Kadyrov, the Chechen warlord that he is. And they got a hold of enough of the information. They were able to level two big strikes on them and have announced essentially a extension of sort of like the effort we called, I'm trying to get out of Ukrainian thinking, you want to live, and reminding Chechens that Russians treated them pretty badly, and also thus having us remind to you Russians treated Chechens pretty badly. And so this article is essentially about the effort directly from Ukrainian intelligence, and it rarely happens like this. Of all the things they ever post, they rarely put out a big announcement like this, including a phone number. They did. They went so far as a phone number. If you would like to join today, call 1-800. Come kick some ass. And so it was a very interesting article to put together, and it was part of what I think to be the way in which Russia cannot control this thing very well.
No, look at this week with the guy and the recruits who posed as a Russian soldier, then said, "If you come to my country," and let it said, "I'm going to come and I have to come and kill you," in the
Yeah,
middle
yeah,
of a
yeah.
classroom full of Russian would-be
The
students.
the wire when he wired into the classroom and he went that
Yeah,
far
yeah,
before.
it's
Oh, I love
amazing.
that. I love it.
That's just amazing.
And by the
You
way,
just,
I am a Ukrainian soldier, so
I do try and look for things here where I try to find similar Russian things because you want to know that the Russians are not doing it. You want to know that we've got the monopoly on this. We're making it, and I don't actually see much of that going on this end.
right.
So I mean, it just goes to show you where where Ukraine is a young, dynamic government in its 40s, 50s, 30s, 40s, and 50s against the Soviet doctrine regime where they cut their teeth on Soviet doctrine, and they're all in their 70s and now 80s, and their 60s, 70s, and 80s. I mean, it's just
Exactly.
inevitable they're going to go back to that Soviet mentality. We had the Soviet playbook. Have you tried turning it off and on? That still one of the funniest
Exactly.
titles of but most relevant titles I think we come up with for an episode. It's just them
Well,
reigniting the
also the
Soviet
fact that
playbook.
there seems to be something in the Russian mindset that when things don't work, there's just like, whoa, it doesn't work.
No.
And in the Ukrainian mindset, it's like, oh, hold on, give me a minute. What is it? And you know, it's. I mean, I'll just flash back to the thing that just went through my consciousness right then that I still can't believe I heard, but I know it to be true. In Bucha, on one of the return trips with more aid, we went to a different center to drop off aid, and one of the priests that runs the center was giving us a walkthrough of the whole place. And he says, I just want to show you something that may still blow your mind, but it is what they did. You see this, and we walk in this area, and it's an old bathroom, but yeah. He goes, okay, so it's a toilet, yeah. Come here. We walked like three more doors down, and there's a wall where they've literally punched the hole in the wall. So there's a hole going out the back of the wall underneath, out basically drains away from the wall, even though it's now two doors down from a toilet. That's Russia. And that's all he said. Literally, that's what he said. He just like say, "Let's see you," and he just walks away. Like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
holy shit, was that like a perfect example? Um, and and I would think that was bizarre, except for, and this is the point I'd make to our viewers: if you can come here and trade places with me, I'm gonna go to America and have some actual tacos for once. No, I miss a few things in America. Mostly I don't. But you would find yourself overwhelmed with the amount of times that you've heard what Russians can and will do once in complete control of the survivor, the surroundings around the surviving scenario, like so Bucha and Izum and Sean's captivity, etc. Um, and you hear it from people who never met, never talked to each other, and it's everywhere. It's the same thing. It's the Russian playbook. It's the Russian mindset. It's the Russian outcome.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
you can only have so many of those before you kind of go, yeah, that's what it is.
I think we're at
And
that
yeah,
turning point. I think it's taken 4 years into a fifth year now to
yeah.
get Russia to a point where it's struggling, where it can't control the narrative, where the propaganda juggernaut has now run out of road. Where does that go? Because that's
Yeah, it's
huge,
at least
and it's
run
not
out of
going.
road. It can't. It's DT Donbass, the kids of Donbass. We've
They can't
mostly
control
people are
the narrative.
fatigued on
Even
it.
the
Yeah,
Nazi slurs have stopped now. It literally is a turning point. And when somebody sort of said to me, "How long do you think it's going to go on for?" and I sort of went, "Well, I think we're halfway through, probably." And they went, "Halfway through?" I said, "Well, think about it. There is no peace talks. The peace talks we
right,
did have." The peace talks we did have now stopped and they've dropped out. Even today, they said they're not coming over. They're not going to carry on with it.
right, right,
So there was never any peace talks anyway. And then you've
right.
got to a point where you've just putting pressure on Russia now. So they're now struggling economically, financially. We've got 2 years worth of funding for the next 2 years, which means we're now getting more from America, which is great. Thank you, America. But that's nothing to do with
Yeah.
Trump. That's stuff that's just been released, that's been sitting around for ages. I, we are probably another 2 or 3 years before any peace is going to happen here because there's just nothing that's going to. We're not going to give up Donbass. Get that out of your head because there's no way we're going to give up that strategic belt or sacrifice
People
all the
living
people
there.
that
Yeah,
are living in those areas, and we're
that's
not
right.
going to come back. They want us to come back. We're not what? We're going to just sell them out. That's not going to happen.
So Mila
So
Mila says the Nazi smears stop. No, you just got them last week.
yeah, I got one last. Yeah,
You
no, I
just
mean
got
it's slowed down. It has slowed down. It was every week.
it's
We don't
slowed
see
down,
much on X anymore.
but actually, I addressed this before, but I was at a historical event yesterday. Some very, very old materials that belong to Ukraine were returned. They'll be on display in the near future at a museum. So I went to go photograph and young lady that was there was going to tell me a couple things about groups from a century ago, and I was already steps ahead on that. Essentially because of my work skills, I was like, yeah, I kind of did the whole work about the OU and UPA and Bandera and all that stuff, so we're good. Um, you have to have a curiosity to come here and get that thing right. And why I mention it is that supporters fear closeness to things that are negative for good reasons. And that was what Russia was doing it all along for. The more they could find some reason to keep people from being full throated in support to release all Azov defenders, all of them, not the ones that say Azov and not Azov, but all defenders who were captured in Mariupol, Azovstal, or anywhere else who happen to be serving the Azov need to be returned. Not just the
Yeah, they're not going to do
Marines,
it.
not just the border guards, but all of them. See
Yeah,
how
they're not.
when you do it full throated, that's what it sounds like.
They got a shit ton of
Yeah,
Africans, Russian Africans, sitting in Ukrainian prisons, and
yeah, exactly.
South Americans and people from Nepal, Sri Lanka, India, and they're just saying Putin's going to leave them in there. He's not going to exchange them. He wants that conveyor belt coming from those
That's
areas.
why Russians call them
If they go
dispensables.
home, if they go home, he's going to stop that conveyor belt of foreign fighters coming in. They're
That's
going to
why
go,
the
don't go to
Russians,
Russia. They're
yeah, the
fucking
Russians
shit.
call, yeah,
you know?
Russians call them dispensables because of that.
Yeah, they're not going to go home. They're not going to get the
Fuck me,
riches they
man.
were promised. So is Putin really going to exchange the guys that he thinks might go back and fight again, the career ones like Azov guys,
Yeah.
the guys that did all the NATO training? No, and you
Have
can
you
bet your
watched this
bottom
guy
dollar.
Zlotin Volodymyr? He's the one that does all the interviews with the captured guys. He's probably the biggest one.
Oh yeah, I've seen him on social media.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I
So
try not to. I'm a big believer not even if they're Russian or whatever. I don't repost generally prisoners of war, but either side. I've got a strong principle about that, and
So you and I are the
I
same. Yeah, you
yeah,
taught
I
me well,
don't
bro.
tend to. I watch them though.
You taught me well. I have the same instinct as I'm watching them. Go, okay, what's the line we all already agreed on? Um, but much like I have talked to in the past about how YouTube knows my algorithm better than I do, so I had to force it to stop showing me police interrogation videos in America because those are really
Yeah.
interesting. No, but no, but there's stuff I actually inherently I do want to know, but I don't want to spend like 3 weekends in a row plus every day in between watching them. Um, and in that case, it was interesting because there were some discussions in there, like 3 women who had in occupied territory given up positions of Ukrainian forces to
Yeah.
Russians, and they were like, "Oh yeah, I did it. What about it?" Of course I don't care if you interview me. Sure, go ahead. This is dumb anyway. And like it's just these attitudes, like, holy shit, I'm watching this. And like, so what are you going to do? Maybe you trade me? I don't have a decision on trading you. I can just do this discussion. Do you want to talk today? Yes, I'll talk. I don't care. And I'm thinking about you guys that I know who've been through captivity, watching this woman talk, and I'm like,
Yeah, they're
I,
brazen because
I
they know that the Geneva Conventions apply, and they're the
yeah,
first ones. So they're quite brazen. I mean, not all of them. I mean, a lot of the guys I spoke to, I can't guarantee what happened to a Russian who was captured on the front line until before I got to him. You don't get it,
yeah,
most military guys would tell you you don't get anywhere just being nice because you end up with people like that who go, "You're not going to touch me," ha ha.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
like,
right.
yeah, at some point somebody's going to go,
But
yeah,
I'm
well,
saying
we're going
these
to
are three
interrogate this
Ukrainian
guy a
women
bit
he
more.
was interviewing that had turned that they were actually, I would say, two of them, and I'm thinking about whether I'm going to write about them because there were some things in there worth writing about. But two of them spoke of what was expected and that Russia believes in laws and all these, and it's very propaganda talk. It's loaded with stuff that's not true about Russia. And more importantly, both of them used language about Trump that implied that they were under the belief of ending a war because Trump said something. Now, think about that for a minute. Is if you're in occupied territory, and I've heard this already twice in 4 years that threw me when I heard it, but it is what it is there are some people who will take either side so long as the war stops. And they don't necessarily wake up in the morning fearing a Russian leader or a Ukrainian leader so long as there are no
No, not
shells
more
and
so on the
missiles.
front lines. Everywhere I
Yeah,
fought,
yeah,
I tell people that all the time. Actually, when I was in Bosnia, it was the same. When I was in Syria, it was the same. Generally, they're quite fickle on the front lines. What would you be like if your family was sitting around you and you're on the
yeah,
front line, and you don't know if you're going to be ISIS 1 minute or the Kurds 1 minute or
yeah,
Ukraine 1 minute or Russia 1 minute? Eventually, after years of war, you sit there and go, "I don't really give a shit. I just want to live a life. I want to do my work, herd my
yeah,
sheep, go to work and not get bombed." And generally, you've got to be really careful on the front lines because they might not sell you out, but they generally end up becoming, a bit blasé with, I don't care if it's Russia or Ukraine, just stop the fucking war. I just want,
yeah.
our life back. So you have to be a bit careful with that. And that's quite a trend that I've noticed in 3 different war zones, that's quite the
Mhm.
same around the front lines.
Yeah,
Not necessarily because they would sell you out, but just because family are quite close. What would you do if your kids were there with you, and grandparents and stuff like that? So you've got to be really careful, especially if you're Russian. I mean, if you, if Russia's going to come in and they take over, you've
right.
got to be so careful with what you say in the occupied territories. You can't just,
Exactly.
uh, you know,
Terry Fellow, one of our viewers here, says, she says, what sort of reaction do POWs generally have when they find out that Ukraine is still going strong? All the time when they
I
missed out
talk
for
about that a
hearing
lot.
what they're hearing
Yeah.
must be totally mind blowing for some.
That's a really good question because generally, when POWs are taken, the world stops for them at that point. Somebody's
Right,
been in 3 years and their brain is still locked into when they were taken. Ukraine's exactly like it was when you left, or when you got put in captivity, which is
right,
quite could be really really demoralizing for someone when they come out, or people adapt to it quite quickly. It's not, and one of the first things they want to do is know who made it out and who didn't, where the battlefield lines are. I don't know whether you might remember that guy who was on a coach and they were telling him that they just invaded Kursk region, And he went, "Oh, really?" On the exchange back,
Yeah,
because
right, right.
he was like, "Oh, because you've been through hell. Mariupol's
Right, right,
going
right.
so fast. You think that the Russians are making space, and then suddenly you come out 2 years later, and somebody's telling you, no, actually, we've invaded. We've got into Russia. You've just sat through all your time in captivity, listening to filtered news telling you Russia's great, Russia's winning, Russia's Ukraine's retreating. So when you come out and you actually go, holy shit, Russia haven't moved like in 3 years. It's still the same lines almost, and it's quite a shock for people to come out of captivity and just realize that Russia's, hasn't gone anywhere. Moved from the Black Sea Fleet, you know, since then Ukraine's been into Russia. Not much has changed. Kharkiv is still there. Sumi's still there. And Russia's lost 1.3 million casualties in trying to take, less than 2% of the country since 2022. So
That's right.
it's been, and then when you come out, you hear that, you're just like, but this is Russia. It's crazy. So that's a really good question. But generally, everyone, because I meet some of the prisoners, first thing they ask me is, what you've been up to, and where are the lines, and what's going on, where are we failing, where are we winning? It's quite a common question.
Yeah, and I tried to remind some of our outside supporters that a whole lot of things that happen on the outside are completely unknown. And here's the last one I'll mention for tonight, and then we will see you guys back next week. Maybe sooner, who knows?
Who
Something
knows?
cool could happen. But Inform
Thanks, Terry.
Napalm, my wonderful brothers and sisters over at Inform Napalm, um, see, someone got me doing impressions of Trump the other day, and now I can't get certain tendencies into the
I'm gonna have
Inform
to improve mine.
Napalm. Anyway, how Russian
Yes,
diplomats
yes.
added NATO and Inform Napalm to their hacker list. Cyber Butthurt
Ah,
is the
that's a
title.
good one to end
Yeah,
on.
I love it. I love it. Tonight came out. The Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs has long ceased to be a classic diplomatic agency, becoming a mouthpiece for straight propaganda in their public communications. Russian diplomats systematically generate manipulative narratives, distort cause and effect relationships, and attempt to distort international audiences. Anyway, they have essentially updated a list, and amongst them, listed on there, is NAFO. So congratulations, doggos. You have been listed as a hacker
Congratulations,
group,
Nathan. You've made it on Russia's
along
hit
with
list.
Inform Napalm, the number one super badasses of information warfare there is. I
Yeah.
love Inform Napalm. They are Super Bowl all by themselves. So
The Russians are now paranoid about animated dogs. It's just hilarious. Oh,
exactly.
fantastic. You can't, right. That's a good way to end the program. That just
Yeah,
goes
yeah,
to
yeah.
show you how the communities come together to fight this
But I
genocide. I'm
think
going to
about
call it
that. We
that.
have guys that came back, and my friend who runs Daily Fella was nice enough to post a video, a photo of different defenders we were waiting on in the middle of all the silliness that they post. And so when they got home, my friend Ruslan was able to post um, the front page of Daily Fella with his photo on the front of it, having come home. Like, he doesn't know what a fella is. He's never heard of NAFO.
I didn't. Somebody
Yeah,
put on my thing the other day. I went, do you remember I was telling you about NAFO?
yeah,
And I went, oh, yeah, I do, yeah, because I
yeah.
know.
And it's like,
What the fuck is
that was an
NAFO?
amazing feeling, and the same
NAFO?
thing
NAFO?
happened to the other guys when they found that there was a entire, essentially pro-Ukraine troll army that was breeding while they were in captivity of
Yeah.
Shiba Inu dogs. One of my friends, he says, Maxime says, "Why Shiba Inu though? I don't get why that dog."
I was just like, I don't know. I didn't even know this thing existed. And then somebody said, do you want a character? So of course, when this news came out this week, I had to bring out my little fella.
Yeah.
which somebody said, you can't say it like that. Don't tell everybody you're going to show them your little fella, because that's just like so wrong. You're going to get, you're going to get,
Got a lot of people in
you're going to get
trouble.
banned. You're going to get banned if you keep saying things like that. I'm going to see my little fella.
So here's a promo. I'm not going to wire all this stuff up, but that you guys will be seeing some soon.
Oh, let's tease it now. Let's tease it now. You got to get it finished.
These guys went through a lot, man.
Yeah, you can't really hear it. Is it going to be translated?
Oh no, you have to learn Ukrainian.
Oh, that's all right then. I'll watch it in about 20 years, because I've been in 8 years and I still can't
No,
speak it.
that's actually what I've been doing is translating all of it.
That's good.
Yeah, but
I got pictures with me and him in the early days of 2020.
exactly. But
Yeah, can't wait for you to finish that. I want to do a long-term project now. I need to get a long-term project done.
so yeah, and I can say that you're special to the 36 Marines that I know. You, they have not met you, but they know you and they love you.
Yeah, I'm going to show
My
him when we
friend
meet. I'll show
Tatiana
him the
is
picture.
always
We played football against him, actually.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's and they're he's down in Odessa right now. So one of the things I'm looking at is our travel guide and back to the thing I said about supporters and those who have been both free supporters. All the articles are always free. They will remain free. I like it that way. Paid supporters, the fact that it does stack up means that I can go hang out with Sean to film with some people we know. I can go to Lviv to film and catch up on some of the filming we did with this. There's some additional storylines that go on. And the fact that we live here, um, you travel more than I do, even though you actually also live here. But the fact that we live here gives us the ability to see these stories in a way that isn't really true for a lot of network television in America or BBC, etc. When
Yeah,
they send
absolutely.
stringers here, because we live here, so there are layers
That's
and
what I
layers and
said.
layers of the stories
Yeah.
here. You know,
I said that about mine. I said if
yeah,
you sign up, you're not just signing into a Substack. You're signing into our friends, families, where we
yeah,
live. You're signing into a little bit more than just someone who's commentating on the war from another country.
yeah,
These are our families, our stories, and hopefully things
pretty
like
much,
mine reflect that in the back catalogue that we're starting to develop here now with interviews with POWs and
right.
uh, families, and your video that's
Well, and
coming
part of the
out. And
point is like with these videos is that part of the point is that as we can get the team together financially as well, where there's a budget for a team, you and I have both the experience and the know-how of this, where we can, and I use this word or this phrase as supportive as possible. We can conveyor belt the stories up to the Western audience to hear and see, because
yeah,
I get to see them in the Ukrainian news sphere, in Ukrainian, aimed at Ukrainians, but very rarely do I get to see them
out.
reproduced for the English speaking audience. So that's what's been
Absolutely,
good.
they don't. Yeah, this is the big campaign we've got, is trying to get Ukrainian journalists, Ukrainian people out to tell the story, rather than just have,
Yeah.
you know, it just doesn't, for some reason, especially the American audience, they just don't want to bring on somebody that knows about Maidan. They'd rather bring on an American who's living in Alabama, who's written a book about, Maidan and the Russian influence or something, and
Who
they
went
bring
to
in one.
Moscow 5 times before writing it, no less.
It's just like this. It's ridiculous. And we've all seen what happens when you do get an English-speaking Ukrainian on. They tear them apart. It's like that's why they don't want them on. So
That's right.
yeah, we got to get them out there or tell their story for them a bit and give them a platform. So That's cool.
Well, again, thank you to everyone tuning in tonight. We will see you
Thank you.
on the replay, and also pay attention to the timeline. And don't know what the schedule will be. It's been kind of strange. People are very busy running around, but we're always going to have some cool guests coming up for you. And I have some in the wings right now, just waiting for them to land. And should we have breaking news of super importance or something like that to come your way, I will. The last thing is that I have been working, and I talked to you about this earlier, Sean. I've been working on the more broadcast form of all of this, including
Thanks, Alan.
footage and videos that I have filmed here to bring to you, and new ways of kind of taking the coverage we know here and ramping up a couple of notches for you. So just stay tuned, and your support is part of why that happens, because after you have been kind to donate money
Dziękuję.
to through subscriptions, then we wake up and go, "Well, I better do something." Just
Saying
kidding.
dziękuję to everybody. Thank you.
And Giacomo
Odachi.
from us, and we will see you soon. Take care of
Thank you.
yourself. Be
See you later,
strong.
brother.
Slava Ukraini
All right, Slava. Cheers, Chris. See you later.
i pizdeць Російської Федерації.